in which our protagonists, Anna and Levine, finally meet, and in which one of their tales comes to an end. Chapter 1. The Levines were already living for the third month in Moscow. The term was long past when, by the surest calculations of people who knew about such things, Kitty ought to have given birth. And yet she was still expecting, and there was no indication that the time was nearer now than 2 months ago. The doctor, the midwife, Dolly, her mother, and Levine especially, who could not think of the approaching event without horror, were beginning to feel impatient and anxious. Kitty alone was perfectly calm and happy. She was now clearly aware of the new feeling of love being born in her for the future child, who, for her, was already partly present, and she delighted in attending to this feeling. It was no longer wholly a part of her now, but sometimes lived its own life independent of her. It often caused her pain, but at the same time made her want to laugh with a strange new joy. Everyone she loved was with her, and everyone was so kind to her, took such care of her. She saw so much of sheer pleasantness in all that was offered to her, that if she had not known and felt that it must soon end, she could not even have wished for a better or more pleasant life. The one thing that spoiled the charm of that life for her was that her husband was not the way she loved him and the way he used to be in the country. She loved his calm, gentle, and hospitable tone in the country, but in the city he was constantly anxious and wary, as if fearing someone might offend him, and above all, her. There in the country, obviously knowing he was where he belonged, he did not hurry anywhere, and was never unoccupied. Here in the city he was constantly in a hurry, as though he might miss something, and he had nothing to do, and she pitied him. To others she knew he did not look pitiful. On the contrary, when Kitty watched him in company, as one sometimes watches a person one loves, trying to see him as a stranger, to define the impression he makes on others, she saw, even with fear of her own jealousy, that he was not only not pitiful, but very attractive in his decency, his rather old-fashioned, bashful politeness with women, his powerful figure, and his, as it seemed to her, particularly expressive face. But she saw him not from the outside, but from inside. She saw that here he was not his real self. There was no other way she could define his condition. Sometimes she reproached him in her heart for not knowing how to live in the city. Sometimes she also admitted that it was truly difficult for him to arrange his life here in a satisfying way. Indeed, what was there for him to do? He did not like to play cards. He did not go to the club. To keep company with merry men like Oblonsky, she now knew what that meant. It meant drinking and going somewhere afterwards. She could not think without horror of where men went on such occasions. To go out in society? But for that she knew that one hand had to take pleasure in meeting young women, and she could not wish for that. To sit at home with her and her mother and sister. But however pleasant and enjoyable she found those ever-identical conversations, Aline and Nadine, as the old prince called those conversations between sisters, she knew they had to be boring for him. what was left for him to do? To go on writing his book? He did try to do that, and in the beginning went to the library to take notes and references, but as he told her, the longer he did nothing, the less time he had left. And besides, he complained to her that he had talked much about his book here, and as a result of all his thoughts about it had become confused, and he had lost interest in them. One advantage of the city life was that here in the city they never had any quarrels, either because city conditions were different or because they'd both become more prudent and sensible in that respect. In Moscow they had no quarrels because of jealousy, something they had been very much afraid of when they moved to the city. There even occurred an event that was very important for them both, namely Kitty's meeting with Vronsky. The old Princess Maria Borisovna, Kitty's godmother, who had always loved her, wanted to see her without fail. Kitty, who in her condition never went anywhere, did go with her father to see the venerable old woman, and there met Vronsky. The only thing Kitty could reproach herself with in that meeting was that when she recognized that once so familiar figure in his civilian clothes, her breath was taken away. The blood rushed to her heart, and bright color, she could feel it, came to her face. But that lasted only a few seconds. Before her father, who purposely addressed Vronsky in a loud voice, had finished what he was saying, she was fully prepared to look at him, to talk with him, if necessary, just as she talked with Princess Maria Borisovna, and above all, that so everything to the very last intonation and smile could have been approved of by her husband, whose invisible presence she seemed to feel above her at that moment. She said a few words to him, even smiled calmly at his joke about the elections, which he called our parliaments. She had to smile to show that she understood the joke, but she immediately turned away, so Princess Maria Borisovna and never once glanced at him until he got up to leave. Then she looked at him, but obviously only because it was impolite not to look at a man when he was bowing to you. She was grateful to her father for not saying anything about meeting Vronsky, but by his special tenderness after the visit, during their usual walk, she saw that he was pleased with her. She was pleased with herself. She had never expected that she would have the strength to hold down somewhere deep in her heart all memories of her former feeling for Vronsky, and not only to seem, but to be quite indifferent and calm towards him. Levin flushed much more than she did when she told him that she had met Vronsky at Princess Maria Borisovna's. It was very hard for her to tell him about it, and still harder for her to go on talking about the details of the meeting, since he did not ask but only looked frowning at her. "It's too bad you weren't there," she said. "That is, not that you weren't in the room. I wouldn't have been so natural with you there. Now I'm blushing much more, she said, blushing to tears, but that you couldn't have looked through a crack." Her truthful eyes told Levin that she was pleased with herself, and despite her blushing, he calmed down at once and began asking questions, which was just what she wanted. When he had learned everything, even to the detail that she could not help flushing in the first second, but after that had felt as simple and easy as with anybody at all, Levin cheered up completely, and said he was very glad of it, and that now he would not behave as stupidly as he had at the elections, but would try at the very first meeting with Vronsky to be as friendly as possible. "It's so tormenting to think that there's a man who is almost enemy, whom it's painful to meet," said Levin. "I'm very, very glad." If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.